What's up, Stitt-Heads? Party time. All right, crack that beer. How we doing today? All right, there's a bunch of craziness in the world. There's always craziness in the world, but there's always been craziness in the world. And today's guest is going to break down some of these things that we've kind of forgotten about. Lost ancient histories, different things, different sites around the world, different things that just have weird strangeness to them. So, anyways, without further ado, welcome to the show for the first time, Alexander. How you doing, brother?
Thanks for having me on, and hello everyone listening. I think you did a great introduction because, yes, what my research in my book is all about is that nothing is new under the sun, and lots of the things that are happening right now and that have been happening in the last 10 or so years, everything has already been, and we see plenty of parallels with ancient times, even maybe more remote times, and we see that our history is cyclical.
Yeah, it just repeats. And, it's like the same playbook one generation or one, 1,000 years ago or 10 years ago. It's almost like the narratives of like there's only so many stories you can tell before it starts repeating again.
Yes, yes, I totally agree.
Well, so tell us a little bit about you and your book, man. You got a cool book about basically ancient history called Deja Vu.
Yes, my book is Déjà Vu, has everything already been. You can find it on Amazon. I think the easiest way would be copy and paste my name and surname, and you will find it on most of the Amazons, US, UK, Canada, etc. The same with all of my social media, just copy and paste my name and surname. That's the easiest way for everyone. And my book, Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, is mostly about lost history, like lost civilization, lost ancient texts, lost ancient knowledge, technology, and stuff like that, with the twist of cyclical time based on the actual knowledge of our ancient ancestors, because it's not only that, oh, this repeats, oh, that repeats, but it may be even much more in alignment with cycles of time that have been decoded by our ancient ancestors, the precision of the equinoxes, so astronomical time. And I think that examples of repeated history, if they are really repeated in these cycles of time that our ancient ancestors portrayed, may be one of the best evidence for something metaphysical, spiritual going on, not only biology, not only physics, but something at a bigger scale that is influencing our life and making the history and making stuff repeated. So I would say 80% of my book is like lost history of civilization, and 20 is the twist. And what differs like just from casual lost civilization book, of course most of them tell you a little bit about that. I try to look at everything from our modern perspective. Like, we are talking about lost civilizations, so what would happen if our modern current civilization would vanish due to some kind of a cataclysm or something?
Hmm.
How the remnants of it would behave, and is it possible that a similar one was already there in the ancient or prehistorical times?
Yeah, dude. Because there's this dogma that most like archaeologists and historians and stuff they live in this like linear timeline of, well, this came first and then this turned to this and then the stone age and the bronze age and the blah blah blah. But you're like, well, there's a funny thing what like people point out that like, well, modern times you have people that are like tribes that still live on islands, while we also have AI data centers being built left and right. So like, what if certain things were coexisting together? So my point of that is kind of just like the idea, like you said, what if there's more to it than just this timeline of, hey, this guy built this thing and then they built this next, and maybe there's something higher within, without, I don't know, man. But what are your thoughts? What made you decide to start going down this trail?
Yes, exactly. I totally agree. I can give more context, as you've said. Maybe nowadays we think it's a little bit linear, at least it's progress. Maybe it's not like just linear progress, but even exponential one, during the last 200 or 100 years with all of the technology, at least it seems to us this way from what we know about our recorded history. But from instance, mostly during the medieval times, there was a completely opposite view of our history, from the fall of Adam and Eve, of the Garden of Eden, paradise, etc., fall of humanity. So a downward spiral. Maybe at the end, with some kind of salvation, etc., it will be better. But it was opposite. So I often show this picture because nowadays we think it's a progress. Some people thought it is a constant regress. Even nowadays, plenty of people see that everything is falling down. But for instance, lots of our ancient ancestors, like ancient Indians, like ancient Greeks, thought that it's cyclical. There are ups and downs and everything is cyclical. So, maybe right now it's a little bit falling, but then it will come back again. But when it comes to my background with everything, with all the research, with all my book, I actually wrote this book when I was 17. And it's
Oh,
like a
nice.
full 400 something pages book with like footnotes, bibliography, everything. And
Nice.
I always was a good student. I didn't need to learn much to pass the exams, so I had plenty of time to do other stuff like this. And what is also interesting is I was attempting competitions because I wanted, to have maximum points and not to worry about choosing my next school. And I went on to historical competition when I was a teenager, like about maybe 15, 16, 15 years old in the middle high school. And I remember I needed to learn everything from before history, like hominids, millions of years ago, up until the modern times. And it was then that I started questioning stuff. Because before I was, maybe not caring about the knowledge I'm learning. Okay, let's learn that and let's pass the exams. Maybe a few things were of my interest, of course. I wasn't like that, okay, it doesn't matter. No, but I think most of us during our educational system, we learn that way, that we don't question it, the knowledge that
Hmm.
we have, but also we do not, maybe because questioning is one thing, but we do not ask for sources. How do we know that? The basic things.
Yeah.
How do we know this is true? How do we know history happened in this way? So I started asking when I was a teenager these basic questions. How do we know our history happened in this way? How do we know that first there was prehistoric times, ancient times, medieval times, etc.? How
Well,
do we
because
know
our
that?
book said so. I'm kidding, but yeah,
Yeah,
continue.
yeah, exactly.
And they don't even really have an answer. They just know that they read it from the book and then they're teaching it to you. And it's like they're not really teaching it, they're just regurgitating the same thing.
Yes, exactly. So I started asking these questions and I started digging myself, how do we know about that? What are the sources for this? How do we know, for instance, that ancient Sumer was the first, etc.?
Hmm.
And when I was, I went a little bit rabbit hole with biology, genetics, because it was so fascinating. It was a time, I think, about maybe 10 or 8 years ago when all of this, like here in Poland at least, from abroad, the biohacking movement, like everything is in DNA, telomeres can give you almost immortality, etc. So I went this rabbit hole of DNA, and when I learned that anatomically modern humans, so basically us, like not previous hominids, like not a dumber human species, but our own species with minor changes because we are evolving constantly. We see that we differ from even people 2000 years ago,
Hmm.
but mostly like in 95 96% anatomically modern humans with our modern intellectual capabilities that distinguish us from other animals. Let's say we existed for about, it was then 200,000 years. Right now it's even from 300,000 to half a million years ago. But if we existed, let's say 200,000 years, and our written history started, let's say in Sumer about 5 6,000 years ago, it's
Hmm.
like 5 to 4% of everything when it comes to our species. So I thought to myself, well, is there a possibility that our history is older, that there was something before the first civilizations, and what we were doing no progress as human species, etc.? So that's what gave me this trail of searching for a possibility of lost civilizations, and that's why I started searching 200,000 years, and our written history 5,000 years.
Hmm.
So I started searching, maybe our modern civilization would in 99, let's say, percent vanish in 20,000 years, or maybe 50,000 years conservatively, 100,000 years. So maybe there were previous lost pretty advanced civilizations in the
Hmm.
ancient or prehistoric times, but we just have almost no evidence of them. And for instance, I was very interested in, again, sources for history. How do we know history happened in this way? and I was interested in history of history as a science. So
Yes.
history of historical discoveries. And I found out that, for instance, 600 years ago, we thought that Greece and Rome were the first, and everything came from Adam and Eve in paradise 6 to 8,000 years ago. That was, the mainstream back then. But of course,
Hmm.
it was religious stuff, etc. But actually, right now, it's common knowledge that ancient Sumer was the first, Egypt a little bit later than that. I'm not mentioning other civilizations like the Indus Valley civilization, but what is interesting is that we rediscovered Egypt only during the Napoleonic expeditions, late 1700s or early 1800s. And okay, we had Egypt, there were the pyramids, people were visiting them fine. But for instance, ancient Sumer, we know, oh, Mesopotamia is the cradle of humanity.
Hmm.
We discovered ancient Mesopotamia and most of these civilizations, because there are many there, in the 1840s about. So less than 200 years ago, we started discovering these civilizations. And
It's crazy
before
when you think
that,
of it. That's not even that long
yeah,
ago. Yeah. That's like,
yeah.
2 weeks ago might as well be.
Yes, and what is also interesting is that before that, in the 1700s, early 1800s, these civilizations were considered mythical,
Hmm.
legendary, imagination, stories of our ancestors. And we had plenty of different texts and sources telling us that here and here were previous very old civilizations. Even in the Bible, Abraham came from the Sumerian city of Ur, which was again
Yep.
considered purely mythical, and then we found, okay, this city was real. And
Right.
why I'm, yeah,
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, right? Yeah, like it's so weird how back to that dogma thing. There's a lot of these like archaeologists and stuff that have, and you don't have to be religious, but there's this crossover that people are realizing is that like just because you're not religious, don't mean that some of these people didn't exist. And here's the proof of some of these places, but that doesn't mean it's the beginning of existence. Also, like you're saying, so it's like two things can be right at the same time.
yes, but why I'm mentioning, because right now it's common knowledge, we found like hundreds or thousands of sites in the Middle East. We know that there were
Gilgamesh.
Babylonians, Assyrians, Sumerians, etc.
Uh
But
huh.
it was considered purely mythical despite all the sources. And what if Atlantis? What if other kind of mentions from all over the world of lost
Hmm.
civilization or of a cataclysm that destroyed previous human civilization? What if it is the same case here, that we just haven't found all the evidence yet? We haven't found like ultimate proof of Atlantis, like ultimate, let's say, city. We haven't excavated it as in the case of ancient Mesopotamia, but
Hmm.
just lack of evidence doesn't mean that it didn't exist. We maybe just haven't found it yet. So
A hundred
I think
percent.
it's a
Yeah.
great parallel with today's, like, skeptics know Atlantis was mythical, was not real, but the same was less than 200 years ago with ancient Mesopotamian civilization.
Well, and then you get into like say just Atlantis alone, right? So was it who was it? Um was it
Plato.
Greece? That Plato, yes. It was Plato telling like his grandson or his nephew or somebody about that. That's how the story really kind of, I guess, got its wings and kind of took off from there. And so you're like, well, that's Greece. And then, and then there's all these tie-ins with Egypt. And then there's other tie-ins with like South America. And there's all these places that like were not communicating as we know of to our historical texts at this time. Like, how did these people know of these greater things when they were really kind of like stuck in their positions? They didn't have well, I mean, shit, they could have had airplanes, but we don't know. I mean, like, how are these words traveling so well? But then that gets into like you were talking about, like the metaphysics of it. Like, what if these people like the ideas of Akashic records and like the source, and what if these people were communicating with each other because we know they were using energies and ley lines and frequencies. So, anyways, I know that's a lot, but I'm just saying, like, you get where I'm going with that?
Yes, of course. Let's maybe give our listeners a little bit background to Plato's story of
Yeah,
Atlantis.
for sure.
Atlantis, the main sources, like accepted academically, are two of the last dialogues of Plato, Timaeus and Critias. These are like last of his dialogues, so no dialogues after these. In Critias, he goes very in depth into the Atlantis himself. In Timaeus, he only mentions it, and Timaeus is also a cosmological dialogue, so Plato tells everything about the world, the beginnings of the world, physics. He coins the term demiurge. So it is
The
the first
demiurge.
mention in the same dialogue as Atlantis of the demiurge. So it will later be used, of course, by Gnostics and by plenty of other people later on. So this is the first ever mention of the demiurge. And Plato tells us that it was not himself, but Solon, a very famous Greek lawgiver who went about 200 years before Plato to Egypt to his travels, and then in Egypt at an Egyptian city of Sais he heard from the Egyptian priests the story of Atlantis. He heard that, oh, the priests were telling Solon, you Greeks are like children because your history is going back only a few hundred years, whereas here in Egypt we have like thousands of years of history, even tens of thousands of years. And then
Hmm.
they even tell, because we think of myths and legends, and these priests in Egypt tell Solon that your myths and legends, and they tell him about a particular one, the Greek myth of Phaeton. And Phaeton was son of Helios, so son of the sun god, and he
Hmm.
took the chariot of the sun god, but he couldn't steer it well. And that's how he burned large part of the earth. And these people in Egypt, these priests, are telling Solon that these myths are not like real stories or mythical stories. These are metaphors of real events that are happening in nature, that are happening in our history. So basically they are telling that this story is a metaphor of a cataclysm, let's say some kind of comet strike
Yeah.
that hit the earth, or any kind of other such extraterrestrial impact. So they are even telling rational stuff. And what is interesting, and then they tell the story of Atlantis, that about 9,000 years before their interaction, so before their meeting, there was this mighty land, Atlantis island, that sank during a single night and day. And they describe everything, what was in this and how it looked like, etc. But what is interesting is that we know very well that Greeks in the ancient times, even pre-Socratic times, so times of Solon and before, were traveling extensively to the east and Egypt. Plenty of people. Even we do not know for sure, but there are legends that Plato also went to Egypt traveling, and plenty of other
Hmm.
people, because people were just bored. These, of course, rich people who didn't need to work that hard, or were like lawgivers, or were politicians, or philosophers, of course. So they were traveling a lot. And for instance, we have two other sources, Plutarch and Herodotus, who are telling us that yes, Solon truly went to Egypt. And the question, because if we want, again, start a little bit from skeptical mind. Let's say we do not believe in Atlantis. We want to, know the entire background. We see that, for instance, if there's high probability that Solon truly went to Egypt, like very, very high. And could Solon truly heard the story of Atlantis, or Plato, just as skeptics are telling us, Plato invented this fable, this story of Atlantis?
Hmm.
When we look at ancient Egyptian sources, maybe we do not have pre-Platonic or pre-Solon sources about this lost civilization island, but what we have is this notion that Plato is describing to us, that Greeks have only a few hundred years of their history recorded, but Egyptians have thousands or even tens of thousands of years. And we have, for
Hmm.
instance, Egyptian kings list, plenty of them. It's not like a single source or two sources, not plenty of them, which are telling us that there were lineages of rulers about even 36,000 BC, 39,000 BC. So a long, long back and a long history of the Egypt. So Plato is telling us like truth about what Egyptians think about their history, that it's very old
Hmm.
according to them, but according to Greeks, the Greek history is very recent, not that old. So this is a true statement that Plato is telling us. We also can check other dialogues of Plato. Plato, I think in Phaedo, is telling us the story of the Egyptian god of wisdom Thoth, and he says that Egyptian god of wisdom Thoth introduced the writing system to the ancient Egyptians. But
Hmm.
because of that, because people started being able to write things down, their memory started deteriorating. So people didn't need to memorize everything as before. So there was memory loss, and we
Interesting.
see. Yes, this is an interesting from philosophical perspective, but
Yeah.
if we want to validate Plato's Atlantis, we see that Plato's truly showed us an Egyptian myth, because we have Egyptian myths and legends that yes, god of wisdom Thoth was attributed to give to people inscriptions, to give writing system. But
Hmm.
Plato added this moral of the story that people's memory started deteriorating. So we have two like parts of this story. And I think the same is with Atlantis, that we can even scientifically, even skeptically, empirically, however you want to call it, tell that at least one part of the Atlantis story is just as real as in Phaedo Plato's retelling of the story of Thoth. That
Hmm.
yes, this part that Solon heard in Egypt this story, and this story was about very old history lost civilizations. It is very probable that this part is real. And maybe the fall of Atlantis or the war between Atlanteans and Athenians and their fall during a single night and day, I think this may be very well metaphor, because why single night and day? Maybe there was a cataclysm, maybe not, or something, maybe it was much longer. But the core of Atlantis' story is, according to me, even if you want to be skeptical, let's say scientific, it's to a large extent true. One last thing about this part of the story is that Solon wanted to publish a poem about what he heard about Atlantis, but political situation didn't let him, so he gave it through his family, I think 2 or 3 generations, and Solon was in the similar or the same almost family as Plato later, so through family lines this poem, it was written down, but it went to Plato, and Plato then retold the story. And Plato was a man that wanted to show the truth, and especially because we call his works dialogues, not like
Hmm.
just poems or something, dialogues, because in his dialogues there are plenty of people, even Socrates, like very
Yep.
famous person, great philosopher, who Plato held a huge esteem when it comes to him, but also other. Critias is the person in the dialogue just as the name of the dialogue, and we know very well that Plato had these people in high esteem, and he said that they and Plato were like never to tell a lie. They may of course use something metaphor etc, but they were never to lie. So again,
Hmm.
another argument that this story is not, just fabrication, and I think it's clearly debunked. But okay, maybe you have something bad. There is much more.
Well, okay, there's a lot in there, man. I'm really enjoying this. You're like a wealth of knowledge, and with okay, man. Let's start with okay. So even if one of my first things I was thinking of is like if nobody had visited there, say they didn't go to Egypt and they just made up this story. Well, just because you don't see something doesn't mean you can't sense it or have like a download or whatever kind of euphemism you want to use for it. So like maybe Plato even just it was almost like came to him in a dream or something like that kind of thing, right? Now then that can sound cultish sometimes because people make up crazy shit and get people to follow them. But at the same time, as we look through history, I'm getting to the point where I believe anything until you debunk it for me. I mean, it's, and I say with a grain of salt, I believe anything. I'm saying like I'm open to the idea of all these historical things that sound like, stories or myths or whatever until you can prove they're wrong because we're finding more stuff every 5 years, every 2 years, every, the columns under the pyramids that we've just discovered. Now they're talking about they've found possibly a second Sphinx in Egypt. Like we find all these because nature takes its course. If there's nothing physical to really be there, think of the South America and the rainforest, and with lidar scanning nowadays, stuff that we couldn't traverse ourselves on foot without getting eaten alive or dying from malaria or something. You can see these structures under there, with proving that these people that have been telling us the history, they might half of them be liars and half of them believe what they're believing, but there's more to the damn story, is what I'm kind of getting at. So at this point, I'm an open book. I'm ready to believe in Atlantis and everything. Because that's that childhood innocence when we're kids. We believe in all that stuff, and then we go in through an indoctrination program called public education, and they tell you to turn your imagination off. Everything's hocus pocus, and that's all woo woo stuff. And you're like, but is it? I mean, we're having a new age of awakening right now. It almost seems like, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and coming back to this idea that maybe it wasn't like physically transmitted story, but like a channeling or, as you said, dream or something like that. Plato believed in his world of ideas, and he believed in a notion called anamnesia. So coming back to before we were indoctrinated, to he said even before we were born, to remember again the ideas that our minds, our spirit have seen before we entered this body. So he even believed such stuff, and he, created all of this system, the world of ideas. And he said that in matter, it's, just a reflection of these ideas. These ideas are to some extent a blueprint. So maybe the Atlantis was such an idea, such a blueprint that
Hmm.
he had tapped into. So yes, there's of course such possibility. I wanted, to show that the bankings of this part that Atlantis is 100% not true, etc., even on physical grounds, on historical grounds, empirical grounds, are not holding water and are, not true.
Yeah. And we have, all kinds of places, I believe, what was it, Turkey, within like 10 or 15 years ago, they found that 20 plus or 20,000 plus like underground, city that, you have the engravings in Petra, which are just gorgeous. And you're like, how is this even possible in the side of a mountain? Like the thing that's interesting to me is like, and we don't have answers. We can just speculate, but like, how were they able to do things that we can't do nowadays? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I was very, very into like stones, moving, cutting, etc. And we can cut to some extent, maybe not with 100% precision as we see in plenty of ancient places, stone, even with primitive tools. Of course, it takes lots of times, etc. But it doesn't, I think, explain all of the anomalies that we find in plenty of the megalithic places. And because I was very into technicalities of that, because for instance, diorite or granite, the interiors of the pyramids, these coffins or sarcophagi as they are called in Egypt, were cut with such precision in such hard stones. How can you do that with copper tools? Even not iron tools, but copper tools, when copper is like 3 or 2 in the Mohs scale of hardness, and diorite and granite are 7 and 8. We can do that. There were a few experiments doing that you can even drill into granite with copper. But what you use sand and water, and sand is also made of quartz, so basically the same material as diorite and granite. So
Mm.
you can cut, but it takes a long, long time. Even you can cut it very precisely if you are, very well at that. And probably some people were, all their life in this craft. So I see that it's possible to do such stuff, but I think it doesn't explain its enormity. For instance,
Yes.
even the conservative estimates of how many blocks are there in the Great Pyramid of Giza, because everyone say, oh, about 2.3 million blocks. This is like casual, even scientists accept that, but a very conservative one is only 1.2 million blocks, so almost a half of the initial estimation. And I was doing my book, everyone who wants, I'm doing calculations and showing that,
Yeah, and I'll
that,
put all your links for your book and
yeah,
everything in the
thank
show
you.
notes for sure. Absolutely.
Thank you. But when you calculate all of that, it seems that, even 1 million blocks, and scientists say, oh, between 10, 20, up to 30 years of the building of the Great Pyramid, you will need between 2 to 9, with this conservative estimate, 2 to 9 minutes to, cut the block out of the quarry, transport it to the site, and, position it in a perfect place. And we know that the Great Pyramid of Giza is very, the blocks are very tightly fit, they are in very high precision. Also, the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza and its alignment, because again, alignment to the true north. So no like north that compass is pointing to, but north when it comes to the axis of our planet, the
Yeah,
exact
yeah.
axis. You can do that, and they showed so primitive tools that probably Egyptians used to do that. But how you're doing that with such a huge monument as the Great Pyramid of Giza? This is the problem. The same with the blocks. Okay, you can cut them. Maybe you can take a few of them and put them in place, but how you're doing that in just 10, 20 years on such a scale.
The
So I would
precision.
say
Yeah.
when it comes to even the pyramid, I would say there was maybe not like laser cosmic technology, but I think maybe a little bit more of technology than scientists are telling us Egyptians used, but I don't think it took 20 years or something. I think maybe more Arabic legends, because when Arabs invaded Egypt, they first what they did, they sent scientists to, measure things, to go into monuments, and they also wanted to, write down all of the stories of people who were living there, what they were telling them about these blocks, these pyramids, buildings, etc. And they wrote a very good legend about King Saurid, who built the pyramids in about 300 years, because 300 years before he had a dream of an incoming flood. So he started 300 years before the flood building the pyramids
Mm.
in order to preserve stuff. And what is also very interesting is that plenty of experiments, and they are like, it's 100 years of experiments in the energy or something when it comes to the pyramid technology, maybe not even physical, but metaphysical, spiritual technology, is that there are some effects that pyramid is giving us that may be good for preserving metals, preserving artifacts, etc. Even I think in 1940s, Czechoslovakian Karl Drubal patented the Great Pyramid size, so he patented like a model of the pyramid to sharpen razor blades, because he found out that in such containers of pyramid-like structure, the razor blades are being sharper for much longer periods of times, even like five
Interesting.
times. Yeah, so whatever it was, and there are plenty of different kinds of experiments in that pyramid may also be good for things being fresh, like foods, etc. So maybe
Mhm.
mummification specifically, if we wanted to
So let
think.
me ask you this. Do you think, because, okay, just put it in like a basic sense, like I ran a metal shop, like I was, manager or supervisor, what do you want to call it, in a metal shop for like 5 years, stamping, also lathes and stuff, old school stuff. So I get the idea of like you can mass produce parts, but there's also human error. And then you also have that parts per hour kind of thing of like, okay, well, John can pump out 20 an hour, but 15 of them are crap. So if we go to 10 an hour, then the quality goes up. Point being is like, you started making me think of like the items lasting longer. So if I go take one of my screwdrivers and I go put it on the magnet machine and I magnetize it, now I can put it to a screw and it just holds it automatically, which is kind of like it's been charged. It's got this power to it now, right? So then you multiply that on a bigger scale to like a pyramid. And that doesn't mean we necessarily know what they are, but if we can do that on a minute scale, just in a metal shop, what the hell is going on there? And then they're lined up with the freaking um was it Orion's belt? They're lined up with perfectly, I believe, the pyramids of Giza. And then you've also
Yes,
got all
yes.
kinds of, even on another side thing, it's like the Polaris, the North Star. I mean, I I dabble in the flat earth stuff sometimes too, because I'm like, well, why is Polaris always in the exact same spot? Like it's always right there. And there's something to that that's like these are just questions we have nowadays. It seems like these people understood it back then, whatever it was.
Yes, there are so many like variables when it comes to the Giza pyramids. We mentioned alignment to the true north. You mentioned Orion, but Orion is on two levels, because from like above you see three of the biggest pyramids in Giza aligned as the Orion belt constellations, but also the shafts are pointing to the Orion belt. And what is interesting, we know that ancient Egyptians thought that part of the soul, because they distinguish ka, ba, etc. So different parts
Mm-hmm.
of our like metaphysical body. Part of it, after we died or during near-death out-of-body experiences, was being shot at Orion, and in the place of Orion there was like Stargate or something that
Yes, you
enabled
took,
them to
yeah.
go out of the universe, let's say material,
Uh-huh.
physical one. It is also interesting, there are a few Native American tribes which also believed that soul is traveling to the Orion and escaping, let's say, Matrix, escaping the
Uh-huh.
physical reality for
You getting
that.
that
So
Gnosticism, you escape the prison planet kind of thing. Yes, yeah. Well, so
yes,
okay,
but
okay.
Orion, they chose that. Yes.
Yeah. So on that same thought, all right, you brought it up, and I didn't want to go too woo-woo on you, but you brought up Stargate. All right. So that idea of like, why were these aligned to these things that we don't understand? We still don't understand. And there's probably things that predate this stuff, but like what are your thoughts on like the ultra woo woo of like Stargate? I mean, because there's this kind of big rumor for a lot of years in the conspiracy world that a lot of like our Middle East wars and stuff like that on America's behalf, that they're going for more like different things than just oil or just regime change. I mean, Hillary Clinton was emailing about the, whatever resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh and shit. And like, there's all these weird things for people that don't seem to be that religious that have all this ancient stuff that they're paying attention to. Like, do you think there possibly is Stargates in Iraq or Afghanistan or Egypt? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what would be a debunking if you don't believe so? Why that would not be a possibility?
Great that you brought up this email, because this is very funny that the elites are, they say, mainstream says, oh, it's like bullshit when it comes to such talks as we are talking right now, but you see the same elites talking about resurrection chambers, etc. I think when it comes to these resurrection chambers, I think maybe the Great Pyramid can be one, because I think my personal opinion is that the Great Pyramid was at least partially for like initiation, metaphysical state, out of body experience, something like that, that enabled humans, maybe to some kind of astral travel or escape this reality,
Mm-hmm.
something like that, but not for like death. So very similar to this idea. That's why I always say, Egyptologists tell you that pyramids were for, afterlife of a pharaoh, but what if it was like not for the dead body but for the alive person, to experience some kind of metaphysical stuff. So this is my personal opinion. The same with, finding such resurrection chambers. We know very well that lots of ancient megalithic structures, ancient temples, are aligned specifically, to some extent acoustically, to some extent maybe not, that they enabled maybe not out of body experiences initially, but at least altered states of consciousness and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So I think this is what this email was about, this resurrection chambers, etc. When it comes to stargates, maybe there are such anomalies, like for instance the Bermuda Triangle may be one, but
Yeah.
I don't see, like, I don't have like one single location that can be such a stargate and it's working. Maybe it's not working to some extent, but I don't have yet such evidence. But I think that they may be glitches in reality, maybe
Yeah.
such things as, pyramid shooting part of you or your soul out of this like construct and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
You can slip through that slither of reality and like slip into whatever's on the other side. And it could sound scary, and I don't know, it could be hell, it could be heaven, it could be whatever. We don't really know because we don't get to experience these things. So
Lots
like
of
speaking of
ancient
pyramids,
mystery. One last thing about it. Lots of ancient mystery schools were above near-death experience, out-of-body experience, and what they were
mhm.
doing. They were, for instance, living the person in a cave, complete darkness, no water, no food. And we know for well, it was popular, I think, 10 years ago when I heard of that. Right now, it's much less popular, but there were such retreats who enabled you to safely do that. Let's say
Yeah.
be 7 days, 3 days in complete, let's say, darkness, and there was like a camera that you cannot see because you are in complete darkness, but they were, checking if you are not dying or something to rescue you if there is something. But it was popular, and it is proven that in such states we can have out of body experiences, because our brains are going, what the hell is going on? There is no reality, there is nothing, there is complete darkness. Are we alive, are we not? Maybe some parts are shutting down, and you
Mhm.
can experience such states. So that's why I also think I have this idea about the coffin or the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid. Maybe it was for such initiation, maybe because in some cases what they were doing, they were putting people in such cases. So maybe they put the person in sarcophagus, and we know that this sarcophagus is like, it have hole in it, like a huge hole in it. So if you put a lid onto it, you would have the air, so you wouldn't die immediately, be
Yeah, yeah.
sealed off in the sarcophagus. So I think that that's why maybe we haven't found mummies in most of the pyramids and in most of such sarcophagi,
Maybe they were for the
because
living and not the dead. Is that
yeah,
kind of your point? Like they were for an
yeah,
experience. I
for
mean,
out of
yeah,
body near death experiences, altered states of consciousness, stuff like that.
we have modern secret societies like Skull and Bones that'll put you in a coffin in a room full of people. It's like, so yeah, it's like
Exactly.
disassociation kind of thing, like to kick you out of reality, whether it's for a good reason or for, terrifying reason. But then that also gets into like, okay, let's hop to another continent, but let's stay on the idea of pyramids and things. So we go to like South America, we look at things in Peru, we look at Machu Picchu, we look at all these giant sites. And then we also have this crossover in a lot of these South American countries with ayahuasca, psychedelics, things like that. And it's kind of the same as what you're saying, where like there's people that can do breath work or yoga or things and get into a meditative state. But man, there's people that can do DMT or ayahuasca and tell you, like, they can't even completely come back and tell you everything. They remember it all, but it's indescribable, and it's like they go to another place, and what they do describe, so many describe the same thing. So in that sense, like, do you think there's anything to that where like a lot of these people are experiencing the same hive mind kind of thing when they go into these altered states?
I think to some extent with using some of such substances, it may be like going into another like false construct reality, just another matrix. But I also think that using some of them or maybe natural practices or like other sources may lead us to going out and seeing the reality as it is, maybe because I think also that this is one of the best evidence, like when it comes to science, when it comes to empirical repeatable knowledge. As you've said, lots of people see the same kind of things, the same like persons names, etc. Even when it comes to beings there, I think it's the best evidence when it comes to scientific evidence for ancient aliens and stuff like that. I believe most of ancient alien stuff we know about is about not 100% physical entities. Maybe not
Right.
fully like DMT entities, but at least partial, or maybe beings that can materialize or something like that. And I think that going this route of analyzing such experiences as ayahuasca, maybe some other drugs, or maybe other altered states of consciousness, near death experiences can lead us to understanding and to finally scientifically prove such things. So things out of the physical reality, metaphysical, but also such things as ancient aliens. One more thing, because in such states, as you've said, people say that it's indescribable with, let's say, our language and our senses and stuff like that. I
Symbolism and stuff. Yeah.
Yes, but I also think, for instance, that's why I'm not like, I like science, but not being like, conspiracy is one thing that is bad about science, but another thing that is bad about science is that science is not about like the entire of reality and coming at the truth, because at the philosophical assumptions of what science is and what science isn't is are two assumptions that I do not agree with and that may be connected to what we are talking about. One, rationalism, that everything needs to be rational, so
Hmm.
everything that is irrational is outside of the domain of science, the applicable domain. But also, another one was naturalism. Naturalism is basically almost like materialism, but that there is nothing supernatural, that there are no like
Yeah.
ghosts, spirits, no soul. These are two of the main assumptions of what science is. So science is only applicable to the natural material world and only to the things that are rational and can be explained rationally by our minds. And what
Yeah.
if from biological side of ourselves, our rational minds are only for survival, and we know that very well to some extent it is the fact, the truth. But what if from this perspective of survival, these rational minds are not made to contemplate the universe and the truth about the source and everything? What if they are just, okay, survive, so understand a little bit more than other species, think rationally, logically, be tactical, but maybe you are not in access to what is above and everything. So this is one thing. Another, of course, naturalism. Why nothing supernatural? Why limiting ourselves to just this domain? So science is basically a tool, just as, let's say, you're a mechanic or any kind of other person, so you're using this method to do that, or you're using this set of rules. The same, for instance, in physics, we have like Newtonian physics, we learned them at school very early ages, and then you have like quantum mechanics and stuff like that, which
Hmm.
is, completely different stuff. But for day-to-day uses, if I wanted to calculate some kind of gravity or I was doing something, I don't know, with my bike or something, I would just use Newtonian mechanics, not this in-depth mechanics. But it's the same with science. So science is only about the material part, natural part of reality, and only what is rational. And that's why I also think that people going into these states you mentioned that cannot describe what is there is another kind of proof that our rational minds are not fit to, the higher realities. That's why there are lots
Hmm.
of mystics, like spiritual people who experience true spiritual phenomena, also tell you the same thing, that you cannot describe that with rational words. You may have some like memory, you may have some like partially visual experience, but you cannot either explain that or using just five senses.
Man, I'm really enjoying this because you got my brain going a bunch of different ways, and that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to open our brains and think. So, one thing is like, okay, we live in an almost fight or flight state in a simplistic minded, like an animal. We, not to get vulgar, we pee, poop, hump, eat, and die and procreate. I mean, that's kind of like the trajectory that we believe in. And then we go to work and pay our bills and whatever in between that. And we cut off those other percentages of our brains of that rationality, that logical thinking, that otherworldly. Because if you just think that, well, if I can't touch it, it doesn't physically exist. Well, bullshit. I can't physically touch wind, but wind is out there every single day. You see the effects of it. So it's this idea of like we like you were bringing up, like we only use a certain amount, and it's like we have amnesia, like we are cut off from ancient knowledges. But it's like, why? Like, what I wanted to ask is, like, we were talking about these chambers and things, right? And so you go down these different rabbit holes as you're trying to debunk history and just question more things. Have you ever gone into like the bells? Like when they started destroying all the bells in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and a lot of these bells in like different cathedrals and places, they were known as like healing chambers. And so we know that like the world is basically frequency, energy, and vibration. So people were coming in with ailments. These bells were ringing. I'm a musician as well. So if I hit an A note or an F sharp or a G, it's all going to be a different thing, right? So if they can tap into these numbers, these frequencies and vibrations and shit, it's really strange that these people were being healed. And then it's almost weird that right after that is whenever like Rockefeller medicine takes over and take this pill when you have this problem. Don't mind the next 10 side effects that's taken over the headache that you're getting rid of, but you might have rectal bleeding, but hey, at least your headache's gone. My point is like, yeah, dude, like why, like, why are these scientists and these historians, why are they afraid of like Tesla-esque ideas, like
Let's go
frequency,
to
energy,
frequencies,
vibration? Yeah.
because it's again connected to the pyramid and stuff like that. I only heard about these bells, like didn't do lots of research about it, but I think it's possible that some frequencies in bells can heal people, and we know very well that frequencies can heal people. And I've mentioned these different temples, megalithic sites,
Yeah.
having different even acoustic side of it, that it can be healed, but how it is connected to the Pyramid of Giza. The Pyramid of Giza is so huge, and it's a model of half of the Earth. So, like the northern hemisphere, people tell you that it may be resonating with the Earth. You're a musician, you probably know that. Let's say if I have two gongs, one is very small, one is big. If I get the big one ringing, the small would be automatically ringing. This is in physics
Yeah.
resonance. So,
Hmm.
if the big one is having these frequencies and a model of it, so very similar in stuff, is automatically vibrating on the same
It's
frequency.
projecting it. Yeah.
Yes, so the same with Earth. The Earth we know is vibrating. It's called Schumann resonance. It's like happening in the atmosphere. And
Hmm.
what is also interesting is that there were experiments, because to some extent you can like shield people from the Schumann resonance, just like in Faraday cage you have no frequencies incoming. So in some kind of bunker condition you can almost cut people off the Schumann resonance, so the natural frequency. And
The
there were
opposite
such,
effect. Yeah. Cut it off
yeah,
instead of embrace it. Yeah.
yes, and such experiments have proven that people go mad, that people are immediately ill, etc., not feeling well, they are very weak, etc. So we may say that such natural frequency of the earth is very beneficial, or
Mhm.
maybe it's needed for our life to be sustained for longer. And I've mentioned this great pyramid of Giza. Even physicists a few years ago found that because it's such huge, made out of the quartz interior with granite and diorite, it like accumulates to some extent energy inside of it because
Yep.
it's so huge. Even natural physics tell you that. And that's why I also think that the pyramids, megaliths, the alignment to due to some kind of grid on the entire planet may be connected with some kind of frequencies, but maybe on a global level, not only inside, because I think one part is inside of it. That's why maybe pyramid may enable you to experience this altered states of consciousness, near-death experience and stuff like that. But I also think of a global level, because for instance, there were like these are called ELF, extremely low frequencies that can be
Mhm.
again found in nature, and we know that such things as pyramids or huge megaliths have this extremely low frequencies. And these extremely low frequencies can, for instance, make 20% plants grow faster by 20% and stuff like that. So I think it's also, like we've mentioned, part of inside the brand, but also on the global level. And most of us probably think, but not, of course, not all of us, but most of us initially think that, oh, pyramids may be like, for instance, the power plant theory or other theories like that for good reasons. But what if it was for bad reasons? To let's
Mm.
say, control this earth frequency, change it a little bit, just as this 432 hertz change, etc., to make us more ill or to make us, I don't know, live shorter lifespans. We know very well that in the Bible, God said, okay, after the flood, only 120 years. In older texts that are, before the Bible was written down, and we know that biblical writers were using
Methuselah
that.
was like 900 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, but Epic of Atrahasis, Epic of Gilgamesh, Epic of Atrahasis tell us that after the flood, all the humans started to be mortal, and before that, humans were immortal. So similar longevity thing after the flood as in the biblical story. So maybe it was to control something. So I don't think that pyramids, or for instance, maybe pyramids were created to, enable us this good frequency, but then some bad guys went there, changed the frequency,
Good
and
point, dude.
that's how it's going.
That's how politics is. Like, hey, here's this thing that can be used for good. And then in 5 years later, when somebody else is elected, now they're using it for bad. And it was like, it's like a hammer. A hammer is
Yeah.
great. It can build things, or you can smash somebody in the face with it. And that's bad, but it's the same item either way. It's just who's controlling it. And then
Yes.
that gets into like, who's controlling us, man? Like life and existence and all these things. It's just a strange, excuse me, it's just a strange rabbit hole to go down when you start realizing, like you said, the nefarious actors can take these things that, I mean, we're kind of seeing it in real time, as we were kind of saying, deja vu, and things are relative now as they were then. We see crazy science bastards all over the planet doing what they say out loud is for good, but they have the power and the means, and we end up seeing that it's for bad. So I don't know, man. Like we're just repeating, listening to smart people, air quotes. It's like, who gets to decide who's the smart person, and what's really who deserves the power. It's kind of like Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility. But yeah, dude, it's a weird world where I think, we just see too much. And I like to focus on that, like frequency and stuff, and because being a musician, because you're like, dude, the idea of making the Schumann resonance change is an interesting thought, because if I go play in a heavy metal band and I watch everybody thrashing around and mosh pitting and going crazy, that's because of the vibration I just put out into the world, the frequency. But then if I go play some acoustic jazzy stuff, everybody's laid back and nice and calm, and it's almost like being a magician. If you can control that power, it can be good or bad.
Yeah, you can, shape the turn of events or something. Yes, that's why I think it's very important. People say, oh, history, not important, some kind of pyramids, all the buildings. Let's focus on what is right here, right now. But the more we understand history, the more we understand philosophy, history of philosophy, what different people were thinking, how different people debunk them or think of different ideas, the more we see, like, maybe we do not see like the ultimate truth, because again, what we're talking about is possible, is, very probable, but we do not know for sure if it's 100% like that. So it shows you multiple like possibilities, multiple routes, because I think modern people, and it's again propaganda with science and stuff like that, wants to limit ourselves, determinism, this is like that, we are only doing like going this route with physics, so it must be true. But just as you've mentioned at the beginning, our childlike imagination, so we can think of, hundreds, thousands of infinite number of possibilities to a particular, let's say, situation. People start thinking, oh, we need to think rationally. But what they are, okay, let's think rationally for a second, but what they are often doing behind their thinking rationally is just thinking with their own biases, so with their own ideologies implanted to
Hmm.
them as programs, subconscious ones. Oh, so let's say this event can only turn out in this way or in this way. But what if it's like third, fourth, and fifth routes, etc.?
Right. They don't want to go that deep on it. And I don't know, man. Like that gets me into like the black pill mode of like they don't want us to. It's like they throw so much propaganda at you. They understand people live in a fight or flight, happiness or fear, serotonin levels kind of, world now, especially with social media and things like that, to where it just almost became like easy, like even more easy to corrupt people. And we see it where there's rising crime rates everywhere. It doesn't matter who's in office. It just seems like around the world we see just constant craziness, and it's like, but then again, it goes back to, has it always been like that? Are we just able to see it on our
Yeah,
little screens nowadays?
yeah, exactly. This is a funny question. In ancient Rome, in ancient Greece, there were always people complaining, oh, it's going to be worse. It was even one moment that, just casual archetypes and stuff like that, that youth this times is, so bad. And it's like ancient Roman people telling that everyone is writing like poems and books and no one like truly does like job or everything, they're lazy. So yes,
Yeah.
this is for sure like thing that is happening again and again. The same with the end of the world. I always, am very skeptical. People say, oh, it's end of the world today, tomorrow, in a month, in a year. It was 2000, yeah, 2012, then
Mm-hmm.
2024, then 2030 agenda. Right now, 2030 something or 2050.
Uh-huh.
It's always the same thing, even in the medieval times, the year 1000. It was even on a bigger scale. People thought, okay, the year 1000 would be like complete, death,
Just like
etc. So,
2000. Yeah, 1999 to
yes,
2000. Exactly. Yeah.
yes, yes. But coming back, you've mentioned, I wanted to, come back to something you, oh, that we are constantly as people in flight or fight, etc. I think there are three levels to that. First is, the most primitive this fight or flight response, so stressful one. So we are very like, our consciousness shrinks a lot, and it's, I think, the basis state that is connected with our like animal minds, like the
Hmm.
reptilian part of the brain, like just survive. So this is the like first level, the most primitive. The second one, and it's another trap, is like rationalism, scientific like stuff, atheism, like this kind of being like philosopher questioning everything but on rational grounds, empiricism, etc.
A
This is
know-it-all
another
with your own
trap.
bias almost. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the second like level, because you go out of this just survival, you start contemplating things, thinking logically, analyzing, but then you are in another trap. Actually, our ancient ancestors called it, how, the Luciferian or Satanic pride, and often the story of Satan, who wanted, as he was one of the best of angels,
Hmm.
there was this, let's say, God, the creator, there were angels, Satan, Lucifer was the best of angels, and he was so prideful with that he said that he can be just as God, so he can be
Hmm.
like bigger than just an angel, he can be like God, so he created this material world, etc. He rebelled. So this is a metaphor of this idea that with our rational minds, we can think of everything. And again, we don't need God, we don't need to believe in anything spiritual. So this is another level, another trap. And the third level would be like openness to like spirituality, irrationality, like something bigger. So connected with rational mind, of course, we are thinking stuff. So you
Hmm.
cannot be in flight or fight response, but this is the third level. And another thing, my biggest like conspiracy theory of all times connected to that would be like getting us into a bigger cage with our thinking, our spirituality, everything. And it's connected, for instance, to the evolution of spirituality and religious systems. Because let's say initially in prehistoric times, let's say it was shamanism, animism, so basically lots of different kinds of energy, spirit, like open
Hmm.
world, no written dogma, etc. Then there were polytheistic religions, so many gods, plenty, even like thousands of them. So again, lots of stuff, but you here start to have rules. Okay, you cannot do that,
Hmm.
these are just the gods, etc. Then monotheistic religion, only one god, and you know, is the world of the Old Testament monotheistic? It isn't. There is this like main god, we can call him Yahweh or whatever. There are 20 names of it. Maybe it's in plural, etc. But don't focus on that. Focus on this idea that this particular god of the Old Testament wants people to deny all the other gods. These are like not your gods. You cannot do that. So he
Ooh,
claims that
yeah, I
there are
like this.
other gods actually. So again,
He's
it's
announcing there are, but I am the only. That's why you'd bow
yeah,
before no gods before me. So he's basically possibly saying there are others, but I am your Alpha
yes,
Omega. Yes.
yes, exactly. So like first cage was polytheistic, many gods and some limitations, but huge possibilities still. Then the second one would be like monotheistic religion, set of rules, only one god, only one like part of spirituality. And then I think is scientific revolution with atheism, materialism, naturalism. I think it's another cage because let's say with open spirituality, it's not that easy to control people. You can control by not giving them material resources, etc. But if you are truly free at the spirit, okay, let me just die and go to some kind of spiritual realm, anything like that, escape this matrix.
Hmm.
Then you have polytheistic religion. Again, you are limiting people, but not in such a way as in monotheistic. And then in the like scientific revolution, only natural things, there is nothing supernatural, we are just random pieces of matter, there is like no further purpose, just to survive as species, procreate, etc.
We're like rabbits. Yeah.
This is the easiest, at least for now. Maybe there are like other cages. I think it will go into transhumanism because let's say right now
That's where we're
still,
going next.
let's
Yep.
say I'm a total atheist, I'm a total rationalist, hedonist, etc. Let's say I'm like that. Then I die. And when I die, let's say I free my spirit because I was just like human body. But then in transhumanism, they can, let's say, not let your physical body die after, let's say, 70, 100 years because you will be constantly, let's say, connected to a robot, etc. So right now you
Mm.
cannot escape the matrix that easily. And if you are like atheistic, naturalistic believer that there is nothing like just only matter, etc., no god, no spirituality, no soul, then you can like live forever in this robotic body just by your own free will. So I think
Hmm.
it's like another enslavement. But right now we are at this stage of coming into transhumanism, but we are at this stage, maybe end of this stage of atheism, rationalism. So we have no meaning in life. We are just, living from day to day. It's very easy right now to control
Yeah.
people, and we see that. And we
The in
said that
between right
people,
now. We're in
yeah,
the
that
in
people,
between, the shift over. Yeah.
yeah, and we see that people who are very spiritual and have their own, let's say, free will about their lives, it's harder to do that. You can cut them off from, if you have enough free will and enough meaning in life, you can be cut off of social media and of
Hmm.
all the interactions and stuff like that with like the bigger society, and you can still live. So also what is interesting is that Nietzsche, the famous philosopher, who was like inspiration for Hitler and Nazis. What is interesting that Nietzsche to some extent predicted that, because it was during his times like a trend going on. So he was like looking very forward to the future, and he said, because he was at the times of crisis of religion, the initial, like maybe
Hmm.
initial was like in the 16 1700s, he lived like late 1800s or early 1900s, but he saw that humans start to have no meaning to life because religions were completely being destroyed,
Yeah.
Marxism, socialism, communism,
Yep.
stuff like
Yep.
that.
Big
And
cities and
that's,
whatnot took over instead of source. But yeah, continue.
yes, and that's why he created this idea of Uberman, so like the bigger man,
The
because
Ubermensch. Yeah.
yeah, Ubermensch, what he said, it isn't like that we should be like God, so I should, we should maximize everything and act like God, potentially like in a bad way. But what he said is that right now, with the crisis of religion, what we need to do to survive and to not be, actually, he told us about the enslavement, not to be enslaved by others, we need to create the meaning. So maybe in
Yes.
spirituality, maybe in other kind of realm, maybe in our personal mission, etc. This is what he postulated, that you need to have enough willpower, enough like inner life to you to create something like that, not to be a slave, to be to some
Yes.
extent like master bat of your own mind, and maybe you can use other people who are in this. He's told that people can have either slave mentality, okay, like if you go with the trend of modern rationalism, atheism, science,
Hmm.
technology, you are in the slave mentality. We are not like 100% into that or not, but maybe some people are much more into that, or okay, you need to do that, political parties, etc. Or you can be in this master mentality, and he postulated that we should do that, we should create our own meaning, and we shouldn't be enslaved, because then people who are like at the power can easily manipulate millions of people. So he was very thinking forward, and very thinking, and I think it applies to our modern world too, and maybe even more than during his times.
Bingo, dude. Man, this has been one of my favorite episodes so far. And Alexander, you are definitely coming back. That was a fantastic ending. Both of those points you made. And yeah, it's like, dude, we're all He-Man, dude. You got got whatever his name is on, before he pulls out the powers, Adam, whatever, and then he pulls out the sword, and I have the power. It's within you. Like don't just read it, practice it. Basically, whether it's whatever religion, any spirituality, whatever you are, don't just read it and talk about it, practice it, and then you'll see success and different things come your way, and you'll feel a different presence in your life. But Alexander, dude, this was awesome, man. And you are one of the first guests to get me to like not talk a lot, because I just wanted to hear everything you were saying, because I normally ramble too much. Remind everybody where they can find you, man, and I'll put all your links in the show notes anyways. But you're definitely coming back for another episode.
Thanks for having me on. I also really enjoyed this episode. I think the best way is just copy and paste my name and surname, Aleksander Czeszkiewicz, and wherever on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, you can find me in English, because I also have Polish social media. You can follow and check me there, or on other podcasts all around the world. And my book is Déjà Vu, has everything already been. Again, you can find it, just copy Aleksander Czeszkiewicz into your search bar, or Amazon, because the English version can be found on Amazon's in most places in the world, like US, Canada, UK, Australia, and stuff like that. Thank you once again.
Dude, you rule, man, Alexander. Guys, like I said, one final thing, just you don't have to know the answers to everything, but the people that tell you the answers to everything are usually full of shit. So just start questioning, and once you start questioning, you're not going to get an answer. You're going to get 20 more questions, but it's growth. And that growth is what we all need. And at the end of the day, nobody can tell you what the hell is real or isn't real unless you can prove it yourself. So, guys, Stitt-Heads, I will see you next time. Peace out. Bye bye. Uh,